Hey everyone, Dibz here, and quick question for you guys. Have you ever wondered how all of those insane tracers zip around and get all of those white clips over and over and over again? We like to assume that it's just really good aim that they have, but that's not all. They actually have massive brains. Today in this updated tracer guide, we're going to talk about how to think like a big brain tracer and how that can help you with your aim, survivability, as well as kill potential. The ins, the outs, the do's, and the definitely do not do this kind of stuff. Oh god. Whether you're just picking up Tracer now or a veteran Tracer player, I guarantee that there is something that you will learn in this guide. Before we get started, I'd like to let you know that I've timestamped the entire video. So if you're looking for specific topics or tips, feel free to look in the description. Besides that, let's get started. First off, let's go over her kit and then talk in depth about ways and tips to mechanically improve on each one. Tracer does 6 damage per bullet, and with 40 bullets, she can do 240 to 480 damage per clip, including headshots. This means that alone, she can kill the entire cast of Overwatch in one clip, besides tanks, not including Zarya and Sigma. Drop-off damage starts at 12 meters, and she fully unloads a clip in 1 second, with a 1.15 second reload time. Blink. Tracer's blink puts her 8 meters ahead of her moving direction, and each blink takes 3 full seconds to charge. Recall. Simply put, Tracer's recall puts her in the location and health that she was 3 seconds ago, along with reloading her pistols. Pulse Bomb. A thrown projectile where after it connects for 1 second, blows up for 350 damage. Improving with her kit. Alright, so there isn't really anything special about her bullets, so let's talk about how you can get better with them. A lot of people think about track aiming as reacting to movement and purely tracking ability. However, aiming comes down to 2 different important aspects. 1. Reacting or tracking, and 2. Predicting movement. Your skill in predicting movement is very important because if you can predict the target's movement, you can track them much more easily. For example, if you know a target will be moving in a straight line, then you don't really have to try so hard to work to track them. Just move your crosshair based off of how you think they'll move, and you'll have a much easier time hitting your shots. Once we dive deeper into this guide, there will be more tips on how to better position yourself to help your aim. But the best way that I've been able to improve my aim over time is Deathmatch. It provides you with live players. This is really important because you want to practice in an environment that matches as closely as possible to your competitive matches. Here are some short, quick tips to help with your aim. Crosshair placement and locking in common areas. Think about where targets normally stand. Where would they be shooting you from? Automatically shifting your aim in that location will often lead you to be aiming at a target who you expect to be there. This requires a little bit more experience and effort, but if you are setting up your shot constantly, eventually somebody was going to end up in your sights, and you want to take these advantages when you can. Matching movement. If you have trouble with tracking targets, this is somewhat of an aim assist for those who are familiar with console aim. Check this out as I have high accuracy on a moving target without really moving my mouse. This is very useful when paired with jumping on unexpected targets because they are moving predictably, so you want to try to put yourself in this situation as much as possible. Trigger discipline. Shoot only when you need to. If you realize that the target is being really evasive, only shoot when your crosshair is on them and don't spray mindlessly. Every bullet wasted really matters. As shown in the clip, those last 6 bullets that I did not spray out into the open after the BAP jump, it netted in a kill because of good trigger discipline. Next up for tips, we have blink. One important thing to keep in mind is to know where you're going to be blinking. If you randomly just blink where you want, you'll run into diva bombs, minefields, punches, grenades, flashes, more grenades, spam, hooks, icicles of death, and arrows to the knee, charges, bashes, and anything else you can think of. In addition to blinking with intention, learning diagonal blinks is very beneficial in making your movement unpredictable. Just move in 2 directions and blink. You move in whatever direction you're walking. With Tracer's buff last year, blinking provides you with a minimal vertical boost. This is one thing you definitely should do, and that is to go through each map and experiment with blink jumps and where you can get around. I've created a couple of videos in regards to this with hybrid and control maps, and I'll link them in the description. Building your library of tricky jumps can give you an insane advantage when trying to engage or escape at a specific location. They involve a lot of shortcuts that can also save you time as well, and perhaps even just save you from dying. One last tip for blink: pay attention to the 3 blinks below your crosshair to keep track. This makes it so you don't always have to look at the bottom right of your screen, which is farther and harder to notice. Next up, we've got recall, which is normally used for regaining health, repositioning, preventing future damage, and cleansing. With this in mind, my number 1 general tip for recall is try to recall so that all of these things apply. If you recall and can gain 140 HP, reposition to escape the fight, as well as prevent that additional 10 HP from depleting while cleansing a poison, that would be the best recall for you to ask for, because in a sense, that recall would be a second life for you. It is okay to recall for one of the above, but always be thinking about the timing of your recall to perhaps add extra value to it. Another short tip for recall is to practice keeping a 3-second mental count in your head. If you want to recall to a specific location, but you're constantly moving, once you are at that location, count 0, 1, 2, 3. If you recall on the count to 3, your recall location will be where you started counting from, and this can set you up for a quick escape or a nice flank. Tracer's recall is also a little bit tricky in regards to health gain. Let's say in these 2 situations you start off at 62 HP. In situation 1, you take the health pack, get damage to 118 HP, then recall and you still stay at 118 HP. In situation 2, you take the health pack, get damage to 118 HP, then you recall, but now you are at 150 HP. What's the difference here? Well, in situation 1, my recall was within 3 seconds of grabbing the health pack. In situation 2, my recall was after 3 seconds of grabbing the health pack. If you recall too soon after grabbing the health pack, any damage after the health pack was taken will not be restored. As one of the hardest ultimates in the game, here are a few things to be thinking about in regards to sticking more bombs. Number 1, the easiest targets to stick are targets that are mid-jump or have locked movement, targets that have very limited space to move, specifically narrow doorways, and those that are unaware of you. Targets that are in the air can't really change their moving direction easily, so you want to always look for this as an opportunity to stick them. A great example is a target that is slammed by a Hammond on your team. They typically float in the air for a little while and they can't really change their direction. Talking about narrow doorways, since targets standing in doorways can only move back and forth, if you just time it to the point where they're walking through it, they'll basically have to run into your pulse bomb because they don't have anywhere else to go. Targets and corners are also really good too, because you can technically trap them if you place your bomb in the right position. And for those that are unaware of you, they tend to have predictable movement, especially when coming out of spawn or if they aren't in an actual fight. Tip number 2. In close quarters, aim your bomb towards the target's legs. If you're close enough to melee range, aiming towards the legs will make your bomb travel faster in the horizontal direction, rather than having this arc. If you aim at their head, it can actually fly over if they end up crouching randomly. And not only that, if you end up missing, aiming the bomb lower will land the bomb closer to the target and it will start blowing up faster, which means they have less time to react. Tip number 3. Continue to track your target and follow through once you press the ultimate button. Since there's a delay in the animation, the target is most likely still moving, and you want the bomb to travel where the target is moving to, not where the target was when you press the ultimate key. Tip number 4. Blink sticks. If you blink and pulse at the same time, your bomb will leave your hand as soon as you reach the target, and it will give them less time to react to your bombs. There are a few variations to this. The regular blink stick, the side blink stick, and the blink 180 stick. The regular blink stick is good when a target is moving predictably or jumping in the air, where all you need to do is just close the gap. The side blink sticks are good for countering targets that are AD spamming a lot, and we'll go deeper into this in the intermediate tips. And the blink 180 sticks are really good for getting past shields or abilities that deny your bomb from the front. Tip number 5. Pulse bomb has a larger area of effect radius if thrown on a floor or a wall instead of sticking a target. So with a bomb grav combination, you want to aim at the center of the grav if it's on the floor. The radius will hit more people in the grav than sticking somebody who is on the outside of the grav. Also, the bomb cannot be bubbled by an enemy Zarya if you stick it on the ground, but she can react if it is stuck on a specific person in the graph, and it can be completely nullified. Lastly, the best way to start off practicing is in the training area against stationary targets, then against moving targets, and then against bots in customs. This is a very popular post-bomb training custom recommended by Dante that I find really helps warm you up and practice before each session. I'd recommend 10 minutes every day. Here are some quick tips revolving around Tracer's abilities and key bindings that help efficiency and movement. Number 1. Use right click to blink. You tend to have a faster reaction looking and blinking with the same hand. Number 2. Bind left shift to pulse bomb. Typically, you would use your fourth finger to press Q for pulse bomb. This results in you not being able to move left while pushing A because you're busy pressing Q with the same finger. Having your pulse bomb on shift allows your pinky to press shift for pulse bomb and your fourth finger to press A at the same time, and this prevents you from locking up in these situations. Tip number 3. For crouch spamming, bind your left alt to crouch. You would use your thumb to crouch, and this is more comfortable than using your left pinky for left control. If you're crouch spamming, you don't need to jump. Therefore, your thumb should be free. Just remember that if you're trying to check the team status with tab, that you don't do it while crouch spamming or you will alt tab by accident. Tip number 4. Movement. Do not jump too much. Jumping locks you in a specific direction and makes your movement predictable. Instead of jump spamming to dodge, you should crouch spam while strafing to the left and right. It's also very important to mix it up. If you constantly have the same dodging patterns, your enemies can pick that up and learn how to adjust their aim. You should mix it up like crouching and strafing to the left twice, and then to the right once, and then maybe 3 times to the left, and just be unpredictable. This is something that you have control over. Also, versus hit scan, you should do quick and short AD strafes with crouches because speed matters the most here. Your head will be bobbing up and down and be very hard to hit versus hit scan. Against sprayers and projectiles, mix up the length of your strafes. Go long, then short, and don't crouch spam too much as well. Projectiles have a bigger hitbox in the game, and those that can headshot, such as Genji and Hanzo, can still hit your head by accident if they aim for your body. And if you crouch spam too much, you put your head into a bad position. Tip number 5. Sensitivity. A higher sensitivity for Tracer is generally good because you can react faster, look around faster, and track faster. Since you're closer range to your targets, you will need to be doing these more comfortably. Follow my sensitivity guide here to learn yours, but as a guideline, my sensitivity is 5.0 in-game and 1000 dpi on my mouse. Again, sensitivity is subjective to each player. If you have a very high sensitivity already and you're having trouble tracking, you may end up wanting to lower it so you can have more consistent aim. Tip number 6. If you are close ranged, aim for the head. If you are medium ranged, aim for the neck. If you are far ranged, well, you shouldn't be shooting unless you're going for a kill, but aim for the center of the body. This is because of the spread that Tracer has. If you are mid-range, aiming for the neck will give you both headshots and body shots because of the spread. If you aim for the head, some of the bullets will go over the head and miss. Tip number 7. The Dolby Atmos setting in the sound settings is surprisingly very accurate at telling you where the sounds are coming from. This can save you if someone is behind you, and overall it will just give you a better spatial awareness. If you have a headset that already has surround sound, be sure to disable it so that you can enable Dolby Atmos in Overwatch, as you can't have both on at the same time. Tip number 8. Every time you recall and are in melee range of a target, melee before you recall. Yes, recall cancels the melee animation, but it still allows the damage to go through. If you do this every time you are within melee range of somebody, that's basically a free 30 damage at 0 cost besides some practice. Alright, now that was a lot of small tips about Tracer's abilities. So now let's talk a little bit about the general mindset to have when using her kit. Here are the 2 most important things to help utilize your abilities as Tracer. Number 1. Know how much damage every hero does in the game with their primary fire, alternate fire, and abilities as well as ultimates. And number 2, learn to trade each ability for impact. So let's go over number 1 first. Knowing the damage of every hero is key information in figuring out your pacing, your target priority, as well as increasing your chances of survival and finishing a target consistently. For example, Reinhardt does 85 damage per swing. If you have less than 85 health, you can't be aggressive to finish him off if he's low, because he'll just insta-kill you. But if you have over 85 health, whether it's 86 or 87, you can be aggressive for a second to finish him off because you can take one hit and still survive. With this in mind, you want to, again, trade each ability for impact. If you know that a McCree has a flash, trade that ability for a blink or a recall and dodge it, depending on what you have available. If Ana has both sleep and grenade, you need to at least use either 2 blinks or 1 blink and a recall to successfully even out or duel the Ana, because you're trading one ability for the other. So before you get into every fight, you must be thinking about your goal and what it is, and how many abilities you are able to trade to complete that goal. Now that we've gone over Tracer's abilities, let's talk about certain fundamentals and best habits. These are the most important things to be thinking about if you are having trouble surviving and securing kills in general. Topic number 1, blink management and how blinks affect your aim. One of the hardest things to first understand as Tracer is how to adjust your aim after you blink. The best way to practice this is in this workshop. It's the updated practice range that allows your blinks to recharge fairly quickly. One of the best tips that I have is to understand these 3 things. Where you will be after you blink, where your target will be in relation to you after you blink, where you will be facing after you blink. If you actively think about these 3 things, you will in general know how much you have to adjust your aim before you blink. This is the key. You don't want to be figuring out how much to adjust after you blink. You don't have the time. Every second you spend trying to readjust is damage being thrown away, and also the possibility of the enemy shutting you down or getting away. You always have to be thinking one step ahead as Tracer. If you're purely reacting, variables can change in an instant and make it harder for you to aim effectively. So, the important thing is to know accurately the distance in which your blinks will displace you. For example, you wish to blink to the left of this target and you are currently directly in front of it. After you blink, you end up at around this location. Now, based off of the new location, where is the target in relation to you? Since it's directly to the right, you'll have to swipe enough to the point where you're making around a 90-degree turn. Knowing the distance between you and your target will help you determine how much you have to adjust your aim after blinking. Let's just say you're mid-ranged instead. You'll end up at around here, but since you're farther away from the target, you'll have to adjust your aim at a lesser angle. And this one is a little bit more obvious, but blinking behind them means that you'll have to do an exact 180-degree turn. This is why practicing your 180s is very important, since you'll be doing this a lot. I do have a guide that covers this already, but you should drill yourself. Try to blink and estimate where the target will be over and over again from different blink angles. This is specifically building the muscle memory you need to the point where you can do this automatically without thinking. Again, this is one of the most important things to learn as Tracer to improve your aim, and the only way to get better at it is to constantly drill yourself. The more accurate and faster you can do these snaps, the less time it'll take you to finish off the target. Alright, topic number 2. Directly relating to how blink affects your aim, you want to learn how to finish off your targets quickly with blink melee. Most of the time, you get your targets so low with an inch of health with your bullets, but you end up having to reload. This is exactly when you want to learn how to blink melee. An unknown fact is that all melees can connect over a short period of time rather than at an instant. They are considered cleaves. Yes, you can hit multiple targets with one melee. Take a look as I kill these 2 bots with one melee by spinning around. This is good to know because if you end up over blinking and meleeing at the wrong angle, you can just quickly turn to the general direction that the target is and it will still connect. You just have to do it really quickly. Just like how it is important to understand your blinks for shooting, it is very important to know this distance for blink melees. One tip to help out is when you're dueling somebody, try to keep your range to the point where you're able to blink melee at any moment. Yes, being too close to your target is also bad. If you're too close, there's this dead zone where blinking behind them will put you in a spot that doesn't allow you to melee and they can survive. Once you see the target is super low and you're reloading, finish them off with a smack. Topic number 3. Closing the gap before shooting. Tracer is a mid to close range duelist. Shooting from far range yields very little damage, but more importantly, it gives away the element of surprise. If it doesn't net you any value to do so, such as getting a pick, don't shoot from long range. The less time you give the enemy to react to you, the higher chance you have on one-clipping them, sticking a good pulse bomb, as well as dodging their abilities. The only time I'd really shoot from long range is when the target is super low and I know I can finish them off, or if I'm only trying to annoy them and I don't plan on engaging on them anytime soon. This depends on the type of playstyle you plan to have as Tracer as well, and we'll dive deeper when we get into the advanced topics. Topic number 4. Take in information and have patience. Tracer is one of the fastest heroes in the game, but that does not mean that she can't put on the brakes every once in a while. One of the biggest tips in general for Overwatch is to take in information. Understand your situation. Take some time to understand what's going on before you go in. 1 or 2 seconds seems like a lot, but if you're safe, it'll save you a lot of headache and it will allow you to make better decisions. If you're constantly blinking into the fights right away without looking around, you won't notice your dangers and you won't notice your windows of opportunity, and that can cost you. Topic number 5. Flanks and pathing. One of the biggest and most common mistakes that I see when reviewing Tracers is that they tend to frontline a lot instead of finding a way around unnoticed. Again, Tracer's biggest advantage is her mobility and element of surprise. Find out where the enemy is positioned, but more importantly, where their attention is. There have been many times I can put myself right next to a target without them noticing that I'm even there. My best rule of thumb, find a route so that you can get into the back line without the enemy having eyes on you, so they can't predict where you will come out from. This means that areas with multiple exits and entrances are the best for Tracer to flank. In general, King of the Hill maps are really good for Tracer for this reason. Take a look at Nepal as well as Oasis. There's a lot of small rooms, and also there's a lot of different ways around the map in which you can zip around without the enemy noticing you. Use this to your advantage. Topic number 6. High ground and setting up before fights with recall. Why is high ground so good? Well, to put it simply, high ground does 2 things. 1. It is a good vantage point to scope out the situation from a safe location, and 2. It provides you a for sure escape with your recall if you use it within 3 seconds. Overall, high ground gives you more information than being on the low ground. With this information, you can easily jump on targets from strategic angles and plan it safely. More often than not, especially on defense, you can set up above the enemy where they have to use an ability to reach you. This makes it much safer for you to scout and recall to. If you have recall, what you can do is you can use the internal 3-second count mentioned before. Jump on the target, and within 3 seconds, you can make a decision to either continue to secure the kill or recall back to high ground for safety. This allows you to be aggressive but also safe at the same time. Here are my top 5 best easy habits to build. 1. Hold space before and as you hit the ground after falling off of the ledge. Doing this makes you bounce on impact, rather than hearing the loud when you land. As an important note, you cannot be jumping off of this ledge. You must walk off of it for this to work. This is important because when being sneaky, you want to make the least noise as possible. You also want to crouch walk when in the backline and minimize blinking unless necessary. Habit number 2. Always take responsibility to touch the point for overtime. Tracer has one of the best kits to survive, and you don't want people to just throw themselves on the point to just die. Make it your job. It's okay for you to wait for the very last second to blink in and touch the point and then recall, because that will buy your team a lot of valuable time to group up and come back as a full team. Just make sure you don't take too long doing so. Habit number 3. Glance at your cooldowns before getting into a fight. This is especially important if you recently just got out of a fight and you're going into another one. It's very easy to get into the go, go, go mindset, and again, pump the brakes after a fight if you can, and check your situation. Quick habit number 4. Hold your recall button if you get slept or stunned. This will allow you to recall as soon as you are no longer stunned. This is important for sleeps, McCree flashes, or brig bashes, and it can save you a lot. This may not always save you, but it's good to always do it just to be safe. And finally, habit number 5. Maximize uptime. In the enemy backline, it's important to go for picks, but focus on surviving as long as you can while doing so. Just being alive in the backline puts a lot of pressure on the enemy team because they're constantly worried about you. Don't underestimate the value you can provide to your team outside of getting picks. Alright, now we're moving on to the intermediate and situational tips, where you're comfortable with Tracer's ability management and aiming. Because of how long this video is, I'll be doing a follow-up guide where I will go over every single 1v1 matchup as Tracer and explain thought processes and how to gain an advantage in each one. Intermediate topic number 1. Angle yourself before engaging. This subject is one of the most important in lining up your one clips. 80-80 strafing and sidestepping is very common, so predicting this with better positioning helps a ton with your tracking and one clip capability. Let me explain. When a target 80 strafes or sidesteps and jumps, they are hard to track from this angle. However, if you approach them from this angle instead, it looks like they're not strafing at all. This is where you'd start using more of your diagonal blinks to gain this advantage. By changing your angles aggressively on the opponent, you can make tracking or even sticking bombs easier as well, since their movement is now predictable. Whenever a target feels hard to track, consider where you are shooting from and think about whether you can approach the fight differently. Intermediate topic number 2. Ability tracking and assuming the cooldowns of the enemy. One of the best tips to get better at your 1v1s is to always assume that the enemy has their abilities up unless you've seen the ability, you've heard the ability, or your team has called out that the ability has been used. But in this case, it's not always 100% correct. Now, in regards to this, the abilities you want to assume are the ones that really screw you over, such as McCree's Flash, Soldier's Rockets, Ana Sleep, Doomfist Punch, and so on. It is best to play safe versus these heroes unless 1, 2, or 3 occur. This also means that you want to be careful with your pulse bomb. You want to assume that escape abilities, such as Reaper's Wraith or Moria's Fade, haven't been used yet. If you're not absolutely 100% sure if they have it, you are basically gambling with your ultimate. Intermediate topic number 3. Target priority and changing it. The general rule when thinking about target priority is, who is the easiest for you to take out the fastest? When thinking about supports, DPS, and tanks, supports tend to fit into this choice the best because why? This is because they can't actively heal themselves. This means there's only one constant healer versus 2. This is why, in general, supports are to be taken out first because of how their kits work. But don't always fall into this support DPS tank hierarchy. Go for targets that are very low HP first, then figure out who you can take out the fastest based off of advantages and who has the least capable healing input onto them. This is why Ana's anti-nade is super strong with Tracer. It completely negates any dual healing onto a target, and anyone affected with this should be prioritized by you especially. Intermediate topic number 4. Understanding when you're at a disadvantage and knowing when to dip out. One of the best ways to survive is to understand when you can no longer fight. If you've taken a chunk of damage at the start of the fight, but you haven't provided any value or damage to a target, can you actually secure the kill? What have you exchanged in abilities so far, and how much danger are you in comparison to the target? Is there a health pack for you to play around? These are things you need to be constantly thinking about when figuring out if you need to get out of the fight. If you've already put a lot of cooldowns into a fight, but you still aren't able to finish off the target, sometimes admitting defeat before it actually happens can save you a ton of headache and, well, feeding. Intermediate topic number 5. Advantages and knowing when you have one. Knowing when you're at an advantage is one of the most important concepts as Tracer because she thrives on aggressing with this information. Whether an enemy is low on HP, or when a McCree has already used his flash, or if the enemy Ana has used both her Sleep Dart and Biotic Nade, these are all examples of possible advantages. During these windows of opportunity, you want to force fights as Tracer while staying alive, and that's one of the best ways to keep the pressure on. Keep in mind that this ties in directly to trading each ability for impact. If you have used all of your abilities to trade for only an Ana Sleep, yes, she may be down a cooldown, but now you are actually at a disadvantage because the trade was inefficient. She may still have her anti-nade, and now you no longer have any abilities to continue fighting the Ana. Intermediate topic number 6. Stick tips. Timing of the sticks and actual value. When it comes to Tracer's Pulse Bomb, it's good to think of it as a long cooldown. However, you must be thinking about the value of what a kill with Pulse Bomb does for you and your team. If your team has lost 3 people early in the fight, in order for a Pulse Bomb to provide you a definitive advantage, you'd have to kill 3 with your Pulse Bomb to at least even out the fight to a 3v3. If you end up sticking a target to get 1, and then you pick 1 off after, but then you continue to die yourself, it'd still be a 4 versus 2. In reality, that bomb wouldn't be worth it to you unless you're very confident in turning the lost fight into a winning one. The same thing applies in the opposite direction. If your team has already won the fight and is currently 6 versus 3, you don't want to use your pulse bomb just to secure the kill and turn it into a 6 versus 2. In reality, you and your team should confidently be able to clean up without using additional ults. This is very important because if you save your bomb for the next fight, you can actually use it at the very start to initiate a 6v5, which is an advantage, and you can basically force them back immediately. This is how you should always be thinking about your pulse bomb. Intermediate topic number 7. Spawn camping. Spawn camping is a very beneficial move, but it shouldn't always be done. Here are a couple of situations. Situation 1. Your team is winning the fight. Situation 2. Your team has lost the fight. And situation 3. Your team is even in numbers and the fight can go either way. Situations 1 and 2 are decent for spawn camping, and number 2 being the best. In situation 1, if your team wins the fight, you can potentially stagger someone coming from the enemy spawn so they get a delayed spawn or a bad spawn while you capture the point. For situation 2, when your team has lost the fight, if the enemy only loses 1, you can take that 1v1 solo in their backline as they are coming back into the fight while your team is starting to push up. In situation 3, you would not want to spawn camp unless you're denying a key character from the fight. This is because of the amount of time it takes to spawn camp someone. Your team is essentially down a person as well, since you're not contributing to the main fight, and you being out of the fight can really hinder your team. However, let's just say your team has Graviton Surge and plans to use it this fight, and the Zen on the enemy team is able to be spawn camped because he died last fight. In this situation, you're essentially taking yourself out of the fight to allow your team a secured win by stopping the Transcendence from denying your Graviton Surge any value. So yes, you're technically still making it even as a 5v5, and the time you spend denying Trans is highly effective. Intermediate topic number 8. C9ing or backcapping. Backcapping requires a couple of things for you to know. The enemy's position and the enemy's awareness. You want to try to backcap whenever your team is losing the fight and the enemy team is pushing you far back. A lot of the time, if your team is feeding a lot, it allows the enemy team to feel really overconfident to just keep pushing you back as far as they can. Now this is the best time. In regards to 2CP, just attempting to backcap on the first point is very useful because it draws the enemy away from the choke. Think about this. If it's one person coming back at a time, you can essentially force a 1v1. However, if it's 2 or more people coming back to the point to contest you, even then, it is still decent for your team overall because now you are in a 1v2 and the rest of your team is now fighting a 5v4 in the main battle. Just be sure that if multiple people come back to you, you either escape and draw them away further, or you angle yourself so you're able to 1v1 instead of 1v2. In this case, you definitely do not want to die. Just staying alive and allowing your team to fight an advantageous fight is a ton of value you're giving to your team as Tracer. Alright, now we're moving on to the advanced tips and subjects. The majority of this will include playstyle, positioning, and timing. Topic number 1, fighting and positioning. First, we're going to define different types of positions and how to integrate them into a certain playstyle of your choosing based off of your current situation. As Tracer, there are 3 types of positions: safe positions, pressure positions, and aggressive positions. Let's first go over safe positions. Typically, safe positions minimize dying. This is where you're pretty much out of sight and out of effective range of anyone to really deal any damage to you, besides snipers. At all times, you want to know where the closest safe position to yourself is. This allows you to plan an escape if you need to, whether it is after you are pressured by the enemy team, or if you are putting the pressure on. Pressure positions. These positions are areas where you are in between effective and non-effective range of the enemy team. You're able to be seen and noticed to the point where you can pull cooldowns, or just in general, you're being annoying at medium range like a mosquito. I'm going to say something that may sound pretty surprising, but as Tracer, you don't have to get a ton of kills to actually provide value to your team. Imagine you pull an Ana sleep and nade onto yourself, but you recalled and you got away. Now, the enemy Ana can't sleep the Nanoblade Genji on your team or use an anti while your Ryan is being aggressive. This is important to understand because, as mentioned before, instead of thinking about trading abilities for impact in a 1v1 situation, you are now trading abilities for impact in the fight as a whole. This provides you benefits long term as the fight progresses, and eventually, with enough trades, your team can outlast the enemy team. Alright, so let's talk about aggressive positions. These positions are when you're going in for one clips, blink melees, pulse bombs, and overall, just going for kills. Again, as Tracer, it may seem like you always want to be in this position, but take that with a grain of salt. This position has very high risk of you dying, so while in an aggressive position, you always have to be sure that you know a safe position nearby to avoid feeding. If you end up being in an overly aggressive position, then you end up being in something called a feeding position. Advanced topic number 2, have an adaptive playstyle. The two playstyles that we're going to be talking about are passive and aggressive. To put this all together, think about how these positions can be used in the playstyle that you are aiming for. To be honest, there are infinitely many playstyles and situations that you want to implement these positions into, but the two most common playstyles are the Mosquito playstyle, which is passive, and the Tiger playstyle, which is aggressive. Let's first talk about what these two playstyles are in general, and then about specific variables that help you decide which one to play into. The Mosquito playstyle is when you're constantly in the pressure positions, forcing out cooldowns from the enemy, and then going into an aggressive position to secure the kill when you see an open window, whether it's a low HP target or if they're affected by a negative effect. You're typically not in safe positions, and you're always putting pressure at all times. This playstyle is very strong when the enemy team is paying very much attention to you, and that if you overstep, you'll end up feeding. Next up, the Tiger playstyle is when you're in safe positions where you're unnoticed, and then you skip over the pressure positions, and you go directly into the aggressive positions. This is why it's called the Tiger playstyle. You stay hidden without making much noise, and then BAM! You jump on a target, and you get a pick. This playstyle is especially strong if you are able to constantly isolate someone in the enemy team and their backline into a 1v1 situation. This is crucial because this allows you to not take damage from multiple sources at once. This also works well when you have an aggressive team who is constantly putting pressure at the front line, so it's harder for the enemy team to be aware of you. Alright, so here are some other variables to determine your playstyle. Team playstyle, team composition, the map, the enemy team composition, the enemy team playstyle. The Mosquito playstyle is strong when your team is playing for picks and standard, or not dive. This is when the enemy team is bunkering down or playing a brawl type of composition. Based off of these comps, each team isn't diving heavily on one target and burning them down, so the enemy team has more time to pay attention to the backline because of the pacing of each fight, as they tend to be a bit slower. Maps that are very level, without a lot of high ground, tend to force these kinds of comps, and the Mosquito playstyle thrives off of pulling big cooldowns from the enemy team and wearing them out over time. Now, the Tiger playstyle is strong when your team is running dive, or in general, you have a tank on your team who is constantly able to pull attention for you. Now, preferably this would be a Hammond, but also Winston and D.Va work too. With Hammond, you're basically playing hidden until your Hammond pile drives a target into the air, and you finish off that target quickly. This tends to be the safest approach, as attention isn't constantly on you, and you can have somebody else tanking all the cooldowns and debuffs from the enemy team. However, this takes a bit more team coordination, and you rely a bit more on them to make space, where you are essentially timing your attacks together. In general, it is important to know at what speed your team is playing, because the timing of your attack will be based off of this. You don't want to be going in too early, or else you'll draw attention to yourself, but you also don't want to be going in too late, or else you won't be able to help with the fight. This correlates directly with what playstyle you're playing and what positions you're taking. The Mosquito playstyle isn't as risky since you're not constantly in aggressive positions, so the timing of your attacks isn't as important as long as you have cooldowns available. But the Tiger playstyle, you need to time your attacks while the enemy is paying attention to your front line, or you'll have too much attention on you while in an aggressive position, which is really bad. Now, when it comes to these two different playstyles, it's not necessary to only play one or the other. You can always mix things up to keep the enemy team on their toes so that you're not as predictable. And this goes back to when I mentioned that there are infinitely many ways to play out these playstyles. On that note, it is highly important that you do not restrict yourself to one or the other. Even if your team comp doesn't match that of Dive, but you see your front line is being aggressive enough, it's okay for you to go from the Mosquito to the Tiger playstyle fluidly, and more so, I encourage you to do so. Never lock yourself to one idea. This is what it means to have an adaptive playstyle. The situations I mentioned before are purely just the most common traits of these playstyles, but it is up to you to decide what meshes well with you as a player and your team. Phew! Alright guys, that's it. That's all I've got for this one. Remember, I'm going to do a follow-up video for the top 5 most asked questions with the top 5 most common mistakes Tracer players make, as well as another follow-up video that goes over every single Tracer 1v1 matchup in depth. So even after all of this information, if you have any questions or thoughts, put them in the comments below or come ask me live on stream at twitch.tv/Dibz. I stream every day except Wednesdays and am highly responsive to questions and talk about pretty much anything. If you liked the video and you want to know more, hit the subscribe and like button. I'll be coming out with the follow-up guides in the next few weeks, and as always, thanks for all of the love. I appreciate each and every one of you for all of the support, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.